and welcome. Nice to have you with us on a busy afternoon on this 10th day of April, a Tuesday, here on Mad Dog Unleashed. Well, hello, everybody, and good to have you aboard as we go for a ride here for the next 3 hours. Eddie Erickson and Colin Schmeling. Bill's leaving the building right now. Get the pepperoni pie as we chat to you about what's cooking. As far as the world of sports is concerned, a great SiriusXM, 888 Mad Dog 6. That's your two-way sports talk telephone number on this Tuesday. Right in the midst of it now with the NHL. Hockey tomorrow, of course, over at the NHL store, so we're trying to lay low with it today. And we'll spend 4 or 5 hours on it, 4 hours on it tomorrow. Everybody's going to be on. You know who the particulars are. Everybody from JD to Ron Hextall to Bettman to Melrose to Eddie Olczyk. That's all tomorrow over there at the NHL store. So we'll keep you going as far as that is concerned. And Peter Lavalette, and you name it. We'll be all over it tomorrow. We look forward to that. Meanwhile, we got things to do here today. Yankees and the Red Sox. Sean McAdam a little bit later on. He's got a new book out, too, on Boston. We'll talk to Sean. We look forward to that today. And, of course, you and I, as we chat to you about what's cooking as far as the world of sports is concerned. You know, it's kind of a weird day. I was thinking about it coming in. And I've been here for, since 7:30, 8 o'clock. It's kind of a weird day as far as the sports world is concerned. So I was trying to figure out what I could do to get us going. We did enough of the Masters. We're not going to, break down Yankees and Red Sox this quickly, this soon to the show today. We'll get to it, but not necessarily here at the top of the program. You can't do the hockey. We discussed that. Last week we did Jay Wright and Freddie Couples on this Tuesday, so we're stuck there. So we figured, and you heard me talk about Chappaquiddick. So where do we go here today? So I thought I would tell you a little story. Get my water. Not necessarily a story, but I thought I'd start here about my over-unders in the NBA and the NHL. It's funny. You'd think that if I was I did 5, and then I'll talk about the NBA playoffs. You would think that, a guy like me who doesn't follow necessarily the NHL regular season and does the NBA regular season, although both are postseason sports, 50% of the teams make the postseason in both. I mean, it's ridiculous the amount of teams that get into they play 82 games to eliminate half their squads. It's stupid. You would think that I would do well in the NBA and do badly in the NHL. So this year, I figured Oklahoma City, I love the pick. I went to the Thunder right out of the gate. They're about 52.5. I thought Oklahoma would be a wonderful thought. And that OKC, I do the over-unders in the NBA. It keeps me into it. And, so that's one of these. I thought Oklahoma City would be I thought they'd be motivated. George, Anthony, sometimes these teams make these trades. The other team does better than the team that makes the big trade that you would think get the better end of the deal. George for Oladipo. And as it turns out, the Pacers do better. But the bottom line is I really thought that OKC would have a big year. We see what happens to them. They made the playoffs. We'll get to that in a second. But the number was 52.5. They didn't come close. They never threatened it. They had a good run middle of the year, but I never really felt comfortable that OKC was going to get to my number. Never all year did I followed it, checked the score schedules and everything else. A couple of times I thought, you know what, they could get hot now, but never really was I above the 8 ball. That's one. And then I took Cleveland, and they were about 53, 50. I can give you the exact number if you wish. Let me get it. I think Cleveland was, 53.5 maybe, something like that. And I saw Cleveland opening night. They beat the Celtics. Terrible injury, of course, as we know, with they were 54 Cleveland, and a bad injury right out of the gate with the Utah player. What the heck's his name again? I forget it, but you forget. No, the Utah player who was injured went to the Celtics. Gordon Hayward. And he gets hurt opening night. The Celtics, the Cavs win that first game, and I figured they were a lock to get to 54. LeBron something to prove, win an MVP. I thought they were an absolute lock, and they're going to win 51, but again, never close. I did think at the All-Star break they had an easy schedule beginning of the second half. We looked at their schedule. I looked at it with Eddie Erickson. I was in Grenada. I said, geez, they're going to get hot as heck now. They made a big trade. They feel good about themselves. And then they stumbled around and lost to teams like Denver at home, lost to San Antonio at home. And I said, hard to believe I'm going to lose the Cavs. And so they do nothing. So I don't get anywhere near them, and they get to 54. And they don't get to 54. Right now, Cleveland's got 50, and their last game is tomorrow night against the Knicks, a team they lost to, by the way, at home earlier in the year. So, they're going to probably be 51-31, so I'm 4 games away, never really tight with them, never close with them. And then the last team was Sacramento. I figured I'd take a team where, you take a ball club like Sacramento, where you'd have fun with them, you take a team, a young team, you can follow them, you learn a little something about them. Plus, I got my buddy Grant with the team, so I can follow him through Grant. I can sort of get reinvested in him. Remember, Grant and I grew up together. I've sort of been up and down with Grant as far as just connected to him for a long time. There's periods where I talk to him a lot, and then I go through 2 years we don't say anything at all. He's on the other coast, but I figured, you know what? Let's take the Kings, Chris, and at least that way, Grant does the games. You can sort of connect to him in the course of the year. 27.5. Sacramento got off to a decent start, and I've been following Sacramento carefully all year. They've played well on the road and everything else, and it came down to the bitter end with Sacramento. They lost 97-94 to Phoenix. They needed to beat Phoenix and Memphis on the road last week. They lost to Phoenix by 3. I went to bed at the half with the phone looking at the score on the ESPN cast, and I went to bed with 6 minutes to go and no idea we're down 11. I said, my God, and Phoenix had lost 15 in a row. So I said, geez, they can't even beat Phoenix. Then they beat Memphis with a last-second shot. I said, you know what? I'm not going to get the 2 extra wins I need. They're at 26. Houston last game of the year. But at least I can watch the game on Monday night against the Spurs. My family, my wife and daughter are on a college visit. I just have Colin and Patrick home. I can mellow out a little bit, and I can watch and I get into the Kings 8:30 on a Monday night. And lo and behold, it's 62-48 Sacramento there in the second half. I said, holy God, look at this. Grant's excited, and he's all pumped up. Look at this. Big win, responding the whole 9 yards. Kings are making shots. They're shooting well from 3. San Antonio looks absolutely awful. Needs to win the game to make the postseason. To clinch a spot. They're terrible. Aldridge is terrible and everything else. And lo and behold, who carries them home down the stretch? Rudy Gay. Rudy Gay. Rudy Gay. I got to go back to Rudy Gay now. Comes off the bench in the second half, plays a great third quarter. 62-48 becomes 66-60 in a blink. And then at the 10:25 mark of the fourth quarter, 10 minutes to go in the game, the Spurs take their first lead, 68-67. Buddy Hield comes down, makes a 3. 70-68 San Antonio with about 9.5 minutes to go, but that was the beginning of the end. They got outscored 50-25 to close the game, and the Kings lose 98-85, and I'm out with the Kings. So here it is. You would think I know a little something about I just talked to Elgin Baylor, for crying out loud. You figure I know a little something about the NBA. I lose all 3, and I love the plays beginning of the year. Yes, Sacramento was a reach, something different. Oklahoma City and Cleveland, I thought for sure would get the way, win 54, 55 games. I get at least a split, right? George, Anthony, and Russell Westbrook. I didn't recognize the idea that George and Anthony would take away what Westbrook does well, and it would take him a while to adjust. I didn't realize that Anthony is a shell of what he used to be. I mean, all those things. And Cleveland stumbled around all year long. I thought that they would play fairly well early. They get Isaiah Thomas back. Turned out 2 disastrous picks. And yet, instead, I take the 2 hockey. I took the Leafs and the Wild, 96.5, 97.5. And although I sweated a little bit with Minnesota, once they won, when we watched the game in that Mall of America on the first Tuesday after the All-Star break, they beat Columbus in Columbus. Once they won that game, they were sailing. Eddie Erickson having the cocktails in that little restaurant there. I paid for it, of course, with Bill and everybody. Once they won that game, I really didn't have to worry too much about the Wild, and the Leafs were great all year. So I win the 2 hockey, and I lose the 3 NBA. Is that the strangest thing you ever seen in your life? And I get murdered with the NBA, and I win the 2 hockey. So there you go. That's my NBA deal and my NHL deal. Now, as far as the NBA is concerned last night, I've also, in the last couple of days, I have vicariously been watching the Pelicans, without Cousins. We understand that. Road trip. They had lost 4 in a row. Phoenix and, of course, Golden State and the Clippers. Tim Russo is a huge Pelican, even bigger than I was as a Giant fan a long time ago. Huge Pelican fan. Every basket. And I've been tracking the games with him. He's sending me Twitter accounts of their celebration after they beat the Clippers last night in L.A., 113-100. to clinch a playoff spot, first time in 4 years. You know, Joel Myers and David Wesley, they beat Golden State in a great game on Saturday night. They beat Phoenix last week. They jumped out early. They win their last 3 games, and boy, he is as happy as a camper that his team's in the postseason. And I promised him tickets to a home game in the postseason. Let's see if he gets the grades before I send him out to New Orleans from Tampa. Anyway, so I was happy that New Orleans made the playoffs. I was also happy OKC made the playoffs. They beat Miami last night. They had a good stretch in the fourth quarter. They trailed by 18 at one point. And so OKC is in the playoffs with their win last night. The aforementioned Spurs burst my bubble and bothered me, but the Spurs, they're not going to win 50 games, but the Spurs are in the postseason. So 3 teams in the Western Conference last night made the postseason. And when I went to bed, Denver was losing to Portland by about 8 to 9 points late in the third quarter, and Denver, with Minnesota having beaten Memphis, which you knew they would, earlier in the night, they won by 20. They were down early in the game. You knew that Denver had to win the game to stay alive, and so Denver turns around, has a big fourth quarter, and they beat the Trailblazers. So Denver now is the last team standing with Minnesota to see who makes the postseason. They both have the same record, and they play tomorrow night at the Target Center in Minnesota for the 8th spot. So Denver will be at Minnesota for the 8th spot. And everything else is topsy-turvy. And to make a long story short, right now, we do not know the pecking order in the West from teams 3 through 8. We don't know the pecking order of the East, teams 6 through 8. We know who's in the playoffs, but we don't know the pecking order. In the West, it's really 3 through 9 because one of those Denver, Minnesota teams is not going to make the postseason. In the East, it's Miami, Washington, and Milwaukee, and you would think they'll all be motivated to not play Toronto, but then you get Cleveland if you're the 3 seed, the 6 seed. I'm not sure if that's a bonus either. Or that Cleveland's a 4 seed. You know, you get Toronto, Boston, and Philly can be the 1, 2, 3. So Milwaukee, Washington, and Miami fighting for 6, 7, 8. That's not that big a deal. But in the West, it's a bigger deal because Portland tomorrow night will host Utah, and it doesn't make any difference tonight what Utah does with Golden State because Utah, if they beat Portland tomorrow night, wins the season series and with it the first tiebreaker. So if Utah beats the Trailblazers tomorrow night in Portland, they are the 3 seed in the first round. That's fact. Then you are in a situation where the rest of these teams are really dealing with where we are to avoid Golden State and Houston. Somebody's got to have to play Golden State or Houston. In Minnesota, Denver, you figure one of them might have to play them. But San Antonio's at New Orleans tomorrow night, and OKC is at Memphis. Oh, I'm sorry, the other way around. Memphis is at OKC tomorrow night. So you figure OKC is going to win, and if they do win, that avoids playing the Warriors or Rockets. So in essence, the San Antonio-New Orleans game tomorrow is for the 7th seed, and I would think that even Popovich, who likes to turn his nose up seeding. He did that a few years ago and he got burned because he lost to the Clippers in the first round when he played in New Orleans in Game 82. You would figure that Pop would be a little bit more motivated, learned his lesson, that he would go into New Orleans tomorrow night with the idea, you know what, let's try to win this game because there's a big difference between playing Utah and Portland in the first round or playing Golden State or Houston in the first round. So we see how we see that play out a little bit. So in essence, tomorrow night, your big games in the NBA is Denver, Minnesota for a spot. And then New Orleans or San Antonio most likely to avoid Golden State and Houston. San Antonio and New Orleans, other way around, to avoid the playing Golden State or the Rockets. So the Pelicans have a home game. If they win, they could even be as high as a 4 seed in home court. Chances are they'll be a 6 seed or a 5 seed if they win, because they have a tiebreaker against the Thunder. So if the Pelicans win tomorrow night, they cannot be any worse than a 5 seed. Because they would have won, they would have beaten out San Antonio, Denver, and San Antonio and Minnesota or Denver, so that makes them no worse than a 6. And they have a tiebreaker of Oklahoma City, so they'd be the 5. So if the Pelicans win tomorrow night, they are the 5 seed, and even maybe a little better than that, Utah and OKC. I don't think they can get home court advantage, though, so they'd have to be the 5 seed. But that avoids Rockets and Golden State. How will the Spurs play that game? I do think that Minnesota will beat Denver. I do think that. Butler, everything else, I do like the T-Wolves. So a little drama down the stretch as far as the Western Conference is concerned. Two things at stake. The 8th spot, and I'd rather have Minnesota go because I think they'd be more competitive against Houston with Karl-Anthony Towns. I'd rather have the T-Wolves play in that series. And then, of course, who wants to see if they can avoid being a 7 or an 8 or the 7th seed in that conference and avoid the two big teams. And then, of course, the lamenting of Sacramento. Again, the good thing about it is this. I reconnected with the great Grant. And I'm telling you, I've been saying this all year. I have watched a lot of King games, and that sounds weird. I have watched a lot of King games, and I've said this a lot to you. It's almost like when I'm listening to Grant do the games, who is so enthusiastic. This guy's been doing the games for 30 years, and they stink every year, except for that one little run. Think about it. I mean, they are 25 and 55, whatever their record is going into last night's game, and he's broadcasting it like it's Game 7 of the NBA Finals. But when I'm sitting there, and he's that enthusiastic, give him credit. 60 years old next year. Give him credit. When I'm sitting here listening to Grant do these games, it's like I'm on Meadowbrook Road in Split Rock, circa 1971, getting the 7th and 8th grade, waiting for the bus to take us to school, and Grant's broadcasting Knicks Lakers in his head. Marv Albert. That's what it's like. So the Kings, I lost 0-3 NBA, which means I got to pay up, which is annoying. But I have reconnected back to 1966. There's always an open window somewhere. You got to find it. And you think if I didn't bet Sacramento, you think I'd be watching Kings games? I'd check in every now and then. You think I'd be watching Kings games? So I reconnected with Grant. And what did I do for this little golf trip? Who did I think of and invite? Grant. 20 after the hour, we continue. Mad Dog.